So if I can beg your patience, this is my statement to the Premier of Victoria, Graham Berry. And you here are my witnesses. Joe, take out a pen and paper. Write ourselves a letter.
Yes, sir. I wish to acquaint you with some of the occurrences of the present, past, and future. It will pay government to give those people who are suffering
justice and liberty.
Welcome back to Schlock Awe. As always, I'm Lindsay. And this week, we are looking at how you create a legend with two movies taking on the same material, the same man. We are doing Gregor's, Jordon's Ned Kelly, and Justin Kurzel's The True History of the Kell Gang. And here with me, the two greatest bush rangers I know, it is Gabe and Justin. Hello.
Hey, Lindsay, thanks for having us.
No, thank you for coming on. Even when I was sort of watching this, I did get a few messages of Ned Kelly going, Gabe's coming on for this, isn't he? I'm like, yes, but there's actually two. There's also Justin, who are the two biggest Ned Kelly fans or kind of experts that I don't know how to, I suppose I could describe you as Ned Kelly fans. Not maybe necessarily mad, but yeah. Right.
Yeah, it's a funny one. I mean, how do you define, because with Ned Kelly, it's like I've been fascinated by Ned Kelly since I was a kid. I grew up in Mansfield, like right around where a lot of it happened. So, we spent a lot of time in places like Benalla and Wangaratta and Beechworth and, of course, Glenrowan. So, I always had this affinity and connection to it because of how I grew up around it and everything. But, as time goes on, you get older and you sort of like read other takes and different perspectives, new information comes to light. I mean, I think my perspective on him is a lot more complicated than it was when I was a kid, which, arguably it should be if you get older. But I would still say I'm a bit of an obsessive or an enthusiast. But yeah, I don't know. Fans a funny word to use for somebody as complicated as this, It
really is. I was saying fan. I don't know if that's the right word, but yeah, Justin, you have a similar thing.
I think that what Gabe was just said was exactly the way I would put it, as more of an enthusiast rather than a fan. Although there are things I'm pretty much a fan of the entire story in general, I guess, but an enthusiast probably makes a lot more sense. And again, much like Gabe, very much a lifelong Ned Kelly enthusiast, I guess, as well.
Yes, I mean, Ned Kelly is really important to the Australian mythology, especially just, I guess, the Melbourne and Victoria one, as we'll get into the true history. That shows two very, very specific Melbourne landmarks, because I'm assuming that last scene was filmed in Melbourne Jail as well as the State Library.
Well, it looks like it.
Yeah, definitely looks like Melbourne Jail. So we might as well get into, and every few decades there's kind of a new one. I didn't get a chance to watch the Mick Jagger one, which would have been absolutely fascinating to see a Rolling Stone trying to play Ned Kelly. But yeah, we might as well jump.
It's actually something really interesting on that. Actually, really interesting on that. I think, Lindsay, before we go on to like the two films that we actually are talking about, there's been a Ned Kelly movie made every decade, with the exception of the 90s, which I think is a shame, because I think that in the 90s, Russell Crowe would have made a hell of a good Ned Kelly. But every decade you have one that actually has happened, but you didn't get one in the 90s, which sadly, I think we really missed a great opportunity there.
And I mean, also the history of Ned Kelly films literally spans as long as the history of film. I mean, the first feature film ever made was the story of the Kell Gang in 1906, and only like 7 minutes or something of it survived because somebody thought that wasn't history worth keeping and burns it during the filming of On the Term of His Natural Life, like the last print left for The Term of His Natural Life, sorry. So, I mean, when you say every decade but the 90s, like literally every decade but the 90s, there's been another take on it. And it was really, really fascinating to see the ways in which it evolves and the ways in which different Ned Kelly's reputations, I suppose, kind of reflect the filmmaking sensibilities of the day. I mean, the Gregor Jordon film, watching it again last night, it's so early 2000s. I mean, Orlando Bloom front and center, like it was that period where every time there was any kind of historical or fantasy drama film, he was in it. The Klaus Badlet soundtrack, which is obviously very Hans Zimmer influenced and connected because he worked with Hans Zimmer a lot and everything.
Yep.
The look of it, Heath Ledger, all of that. But then you look at the far more sort of experimental, weird, true history of the Kell Gang, and it's a totally different thing altogether. And like even the 70s one with Mick Jagger, like I believe that was like directly an attempt to try to emulate. There was a film that Bob Dylan's. I'm completely undermining any of my film.
That's right. He did a Billy the Kid movie. He did a Billy the Kid movie,
and it was
called Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid.
Yes,
sorry,
I was going to think.
The song, the song "Knocking on Heaven's Door" came from that, and I think that when Jagger did Ned Kelly, it's like, well, if Dylan's doing that, then I've got to do another one, and so I think that's why he actually did that, and it didn't work.
No, but
from the same era, I do like Mad Dog Morgan. From the same era, I think that's a really good bushranger movie.
Dennis Hopper.
Just completely insane just in that movie. Just there's a look in his eye. I'm like, there's something. I don't know how many substances you were taking right now, but there is something going on. Mad Dog Morgan is, and he just terrorized apparently a Victorian town with our filming. Really great stunts. The 70s were the era where they would just set a man on fire and push him off a cliff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's actually a really good movie. No, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid is absolutely an amazing movie. And I think actually the 2003 was trying to do, there was something in the thing with it as well, this folksy thing that movie's doing as well, which is Sam Peckinpah, I think, who did that one. Yeah, it's just fascinating. As we are getting into the 2003, Justin, do you want to just give a quick overview of, just for those who don't know, because Ned Kelly, even though it is international, it's very specific. Who was Ned Kelly?
Well, again, this is a question that gets asked in every film. Who is Ned Kelly, effectively?
Yes.
To break it down in the realistic sort of point of view, from a historical point of view, what we know, he was the son of John, also known as Red Kelly, and Ellen Quinn. Ellen Quinn was a woman who came out from Ireland around about the time of the late 1840s or so, and John Red Kelly was a convict, had been transported to Van Diemen's Land then, but Tasmania as we know it now. And both of them met each other in Victoria, and I believe they were in Brunswick, if I can get that correct, I'm pretty sure. And they eventually were married in the old Scots church in the middle of Melbourne, and then they moved out to a place called Beveridge, which is out near Wallen, which is where Ned was actually born. So Ned was born in 1854, same year as the, that's right, isn't it? 1854?
That's right.
Yes,
that's right. Same year as the Eureka Stockade.
Same year as the Eureka Stockade. Yeah, that's correct. So he was born the same year as the Eureka Stockade in Victoria, and grew up. He had an older sister, Maggie. Then there was Ned, and then brother Jim, and subsequent siblings as well, including Kate and Dan and Grace, and a couple of others as well. And they lived at this selection for quite some time before moving out to further out to the northeast. Ned had been in trouble for horse stealing. He famously stole Wild Wright's horse back when he was a kid and ended up in jail. He also hooked up a bushranger called Harry Power, and basically the family was pretty much picked on by the cops. We can't say cops because that was not a word used in Victoria at the time, but picked on by the police pretty much the entire time. They were Irish, and there was a very distinct class system in Australia at the time, whether you were Irish, English, Scottish, French, any of those sort of people. The Irish were usually at the very, very bottom rung of people, usually because they come from a criminal class, having been transported from the United Kingdom. Ned eventually, Gabe, feel free to take over from me here as we go on.
No, you go right ahead.
Yeah.
So Ned eventually gets caught, sent to Pentridge Prison as a young kid. He gets out. That was 15 when he was sent to jail, so he was sent to an adult prison at the age of 15. Something that we certainly don't do in this state anymore, and probably should, the way things are actually going. But he was sent to jail. He gets out and comes back and finds that life is pretty hard at the moment. His father's passed away quite some time before. His mentor, bushranger Harry Power, he's long gone, and you also have just the family in just a bit desperate sort of situation. They were kind of like a farming family, but they were not natural farmers at all because that's just not their class or system. So horse stealing actually sort of worked out for him as well. And Ned was actually pretty good at it. Hooked up with the wrong sort of people, mainly just family, and they just got around doing their own thing. Again, picked on by the police. He's got a couple of mates. Joe Byrne is a friend of his that he knows. He's from Beechworth, as well as another guy called Aaron Sherritt. And Tom Lloyd is Ned's cousin, who gives him a bit of a hand. And he's actually probably more of a best friend to Ned than Joe is. But it's never usually played like that in the films or documents because of the fact that that's not the interesting one, because Joe was actually the one who was at Glenrowan and Tom Lloyd was actually further down the road when that actually happened. But there's a lot more to talk about Tom Lloyd, but he doesn't really feature in the films. In fact, neither of these films we're talking about features Tom Lloyd, do it?
No.
I don't think they do. And such a pivotal character. The catalyst for the story sort of comes to head when there's a character called Fitzpatrick, which features in both of these films as well. How accurate either of these versions of Fitzpatrick are, I'm not really comfortable with that. But Fitzpatrick's just a bit of a dodgy cop policeman. He's got a bit of a thing for Ned's sister Kate, and he is kind of a bit sweet on her. And one night comes calling, and a bit of a scuffle breaks out. Ellen hits Fitzpatrick over the head with a shovel, and at some point Fitzpatrick is shot. He cries that he's been assaulted by the cops, including shot by Ned Kelly. Ned was actually apparently not even there at the time. However, that's what they do believe that Fitzpatrick said, and that's caused a bit of a problem. So they've all gone and arrested everyone that they could, including Ellen, Ned's mother, who they put into jail. Ned gets a bit upset about this, and that sets the motion where everything sort of comes to a head over the next couple of years or so, where Ned begins his real outlawry days, I guess. Am I missing anything, Gabe?
No, not at this stage.
So what will happen after that is that they sort of go on the run. They hide out basically in the ranges up in northeast Victoria. No one can seem to find them. They're particularly good bushmen, so they actually know the land very quite well. At one point, the police send out a search party because they hear that there's been a sighting of them, and the police go after them with the intent to capture them. However, that's not the way the Kell Gang actually see it, because they saw that there's a couple of slings on the back of the horses, which they assume are actually to take back bodies, not to take back actual prisoners. So it sort of becomes a bit of an ambush situation where they basically shoot the police. There were 4 police there at the time, 3 of which were killed just outside of Mansfield at the Stringybark Creek, and one Constable McIntyre escapes. They're now wanted by everyone in Victoria at this particular point. Biggest reward up to then in history is actually put on them. Is it £5,000, I think it was, or something along those sort of lines?
It ended up being 8,000 by the end. I think it started out, well, look, I mean, it could be just I watched the movies last night, but it started out at 2,000. Then after they robbed the banks, it went up to 8,000. I think by the time of Glenrowan, it was £8,000. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is in today's money is just out of control for that. And it is basically, it's given the opportunity where they could actually be shot on sight by anyone, and you'd be completely absolved of doing that. So they're on the run now for a little while, appearing every now and again, just to sort of pop up every now and again, just to sort of get supplies and so on. They rob a couple of banks in between. One in particular is at Jerilderie, which features in both of the films, not, or at least the letter does in True History. But the bank robbery is probably my favorite scene from the Gregor Jordon movie. So after that, they do have a bit of an issue where they really want to get back at the police now. And one of their good friends, Aaron Sherritt, that I brought up earlier, he was sort of an informant, so they believe, but he was also working as an agent for the police. Whether that's correct or not, I don't know. But in order to draw the police out for their grand finale sort of ambush, they murder Aaron to basically give away their position. And the police sort of understand that that's where they are. So the police head up to Wangaratta, which is where they were on their way to. And the Kell Gang were going to rip up the train tracks before that, derail the train, and then shoot all of the police the surviving police as they get off the train. And that would be their thing. However, they didn't count on Thomas Curnow, a school teacher who escaped the Glenrowan Inn where the gang were hanging out, waiting for the police train to arrive. He escapes and he flags down the train before it actually reaches the spot. So when he actually flags that down, that means that the train stops and the police all get off the train, and then they head out towards the inn, which is where the showdown eventually happens. The Kell Gang do fire off as much as they actually can, wearing the armor, which was never designed to be worn outside of just standing completely still. Once they actually did get through all that, they were outnumbered, and eventually Ned leaves the inn to go and find Tom Lloyd and the others who were further down the road to sort of join in. They don't do that. Ned heads back. He finds that Joe's already been killed. Dan and Steve are still inside. Whether they committed suicide or they escaped or they burned to death is still not 100% sure, because the police burnt down the inn at that particular point. Ned heads back to go and try and rescue them. In his armor, he's shot 32 times and then collapses and is taken to Melbourne, tried by Sir Redmond Barry, whose statue is out the front of the Victoria Library. It is the only one with bird shit on it all the time. And you also, he's sentenced to death, and he's hung on the 11th of November, 1880, which the 145th anniversary is 2 days from now as we're recording.
That is actually kind of
I think that
perfect.
covers.
Yeah. Oh, well, the one thing I do want to say, it's the armor that kind of makes this guy well, everything he's done is a legend, but the armor, if you've ever known the big steel bucket head with just kind of the slit for the eyes and this kind of like where they're wearing steel and leather and all over their body, so it kind of looked like this weird medieval knight, which would have been a sight to see if you're going up to that pub and you're seeing these guys or Ned in this outfit. You're like, what is this? Like, I don't know what this is. So it's a very iconic image. It's been used over and over again. And a guy did, in fact, wear it while trying to take out as many cops as he possibly could. Now, as we get into the 2003 Gregor Jordon version of Ned Kelly.
He came to a new world looking for a home and a fresh start for his family.
Dear Lord, thank you for looking after us.
Amen.
Amen.
And found only oppression.
Get your hands off me! You're under arrest! Help me, someone! Not the best you can do, you bloody coward.
From wrongly accused.
Well, I'm telling you something now, boys. I'm not gonna let the police put one over on me.
To rebel.
I'm taking you to this!
They've arrested Ma. They've taken her to the cells. Charged with attempted murder.
I won't take this injustice!
From outlaw.
Drop your arms!
To hero.
We're robbing the bank.
There's enough in there to pay the rent.
His courage inspired a nation.
You took a risk coming here.
Yes.
And his name
You're Ned Kelly, aren't you?
became legend.
These are men who have been glorified as the leaders of a movement that threatens the stability of an entire country. Underestimate them, and it will be you who will be blown to kingdom come.
Gabe, I know this movie actually does mean a lot to you. Did you see it back in 2003, or is this just a movie that you've come across as you've gotten more interested into the story of Ned Kelly?
No, see, my fascination with Ned Kelly stems back to primary school and, like I said before, to growing up in Mansfield. And so when the film came out in 2003, I would have been in year 6, I think. And I remember I was so excited for this movie. Like it was the same year as Return of the King, but it was this was second only to Return of the King. So the thing that I couldn't wait for, the thing that I wouldn't shut up about, the thing I was telling everyone about. Because again, like to me, getting to go to Glenrowan, which was about an hour and a half or so from Mansfield where I grew up, was always like an event. You go there and Glenrowan is this fascinating little town, most famous for being where the final shootout happened. But funnily enough, it spent years kind of trying to avoid association with Ned Kelly until the Hume Highway was built. And then it kind of turned around and pretty much made everything about Ned Kelly because people didn't drive through the town anymore. There was no reason to go there. So sort of off the main highway up in Victoria. It's fascinating. I loved going there. All the stores are Ned Kelly themed. There's always interesting little historical things you can buy and old out-of-date books and everything. So, when I say that, I sort of worshipped at the altar of Ned, I'm not exaggerating. Like, I had piles of these books. I read all of them. I went and saw like talks with like Kelly historians who came to Mansfield when I was like 10, and I was like the youngest person in the audience by far. And so, I was really, really amped up for the Greg Jordon film. But then there was this problem when it came out, because I remember in the lead up to it coming out, and there was quite a bit of press around it, there was talk that it might have been rated MA because of, some of the nudity and violence and everything, which, would have barred me as a 10-year-old from being able to go and see it. And I was devastated. I remember at the time, there was nothing in my life that gave me more consternation than the idea that Ned Kelly might be rated MA and I might not be allowed to go and see it. But not long before release, it came out that it would be M-rated, and I went and saw it at the Mansfield Cinema with one of my best friends at the time. His mum and him took me out to see it, like, as this sort of special gift, and it was the most exciting thing. And look, I watched it. I think I saw it a couple of times in the movies. I bought the DVD. I watched it again. Even then, I was aware that it was, historically not very accurate in some regards. It's actually reasonably okay in other regards. But I was obsessed with it. I watched it over and over and over again. I sort of came back to it later on in life, and like, it's funny because it's a relatively looked down upon film. It's sort of a bit of a punchline in some circles, but I don't fully understand why. I've never fully understood what the issue people have with this film is. And I'm completely aware that a lot of that would have to do with the nostalgia I undoubtedly have for it, and with the fact that it came out at this time where this was this thing I was so singularly obsessed with, and it was, a reasonably well-made sort of evocation of that story. But even as time's gone on, I look at it and I go, I think Heath Ledger's fantastic as Ned Kelly. He's really, really good in that role. The music is stunning, like absolutely stunning. It's shot beautifully. The screenplay, which is written by John Michael McDonough, who I have quite a direct connection with, because he is writing and directing the film adaptation of my novel, The Hunted. I think John wouldn't mind me saying this, but because he said it himself in various interviews, but I know he had issues with how his screenplay was eventually sort of realized by Gregor Jordon, but I don't see it really. I think it's quite a well-written script. It's based on, it's based on the novel Our Sunshine by Robert Drew. Incidentally, both of these books are based on quite literary novels, which I think is something to get into a bit later. Both these films are based on these literary novels, which I think is something really worth delving into, because I've always kind of wondered why base them on books that take such liberties with history when you could just base it on the history.
Yeah.
Because, people are really going to see the story of Ned Kelly more than they are going to see the Robert Drew or the Peter Carey version of it. But, in general, I think it's this really, really well-made film. I think it moves along really well. I think there are far worse ways to be introduced to the story of Ned Kelly than to watch this movie. There are some real diversions from history that, weirdly, I find the diversions from history in this film a little bit harder to forgive than I find the diversions in the True History of the Kell Gang film, because True History, which wildly diverts from history, literally opens with the heading on the screen, nothing you're about to see is true.
Yeah,
it's
that's the point.
Really anachronistic, really out there take on it. And so people can love it or hate it for that reason. I know that Kelly fans have a lot of conjecture with that movie, because or a lot of, dislike for that movie because of the liberties it takes, but you've got to meet the film where it is. You got to judge the film for what it's trying to do, not what you would wish it would do. And, whereas I think that the Gregor Jordon Ned Kelly is positioning itself as a more sort of accurate, true to life depiction of what happens. And there are just some things like the circus at Glenrowan that I just go, why? Why is that there? Like, what's the point of that? I mean, apart from the really vague metaphor of the caged lion, like, there's a few sort of weird things like that going on. But generally speaking, it's a film that I've always got a lot of time for. It's a film I never get bored of rewatching. I'd be kind of curious to hear, I guess, both of what you think of the film, because obviously I have that very nostalgic connection to it. Juzzy, I think you've sort of come to like it more with time. So I remember when we first met, you sort of were a bit more against it. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear, I guess, both of what you guys think about it, because I can't divorce it from my nostalgia goggles. I just can't.
Yeah, well, Justin, how do you feel about the 2003 movie? Now, I mean, obviously you've seen it more than I have and everything like that. So
I saw it when it came out the cinemas, and being a big Ned Kelly enthusiast, as we've established, I was very excited for it. because again, like we said, we actually hadn't had a Ned Kelly movie come out in the 90s, and this is now 2003. And previous to that, the most recent Ned Kelly movie would have been series would have been The Last Outlaw with John Jarratt, which I absolutely loved. I'm not going to mention Yahoo Serious as Reckless Kelly because I don't think that fits anywhere in our world that we're going to be discussing that.
Or
No.
alternatively,
Fucking
Abe
movie.
Forsyth's Ned, which came out in
Oh
2003, the
yeah,
parody film at the same time.
no. Let's yeah. If true history is absurd, then that just goes way too far. One thing we'll mention when we talked about things being quite absurd and surreal with the true history of the Ned Kelly, true history of the Kelly Gang. The one thing is truly absurd and surreal in Gregor Jordan's version is the fucking beards. I'm sorry, they look stupid.
I
Every
had
single
I
person
had
looks
fun
like
with
an
this.
absolute.
There's meant to be a very dramatic
Oh.
thing toward the end with Heath Ledger, like realizing he's losing everyone, and all I could think of was his goddamn wig. I was like, what is that wig doing right now? But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
no,
really bad.
it's really bad.
I think you could probably play a drinking game of when the worst beards come up. For me, I think Peter Phelps' beard is by far the worst one in the entire film, and he plays Lonergan, and it's just shit. It's like, nah, come on, that's just ridiculous. I love the film. I have problems with it as far as accuracy sort of stuff goes, but again, at the same time, I love Young Guns, and that is not an accurate film
Oh
at all.
no.
Young Guns 1 and 2 are great movies. They're great, fun films. And I think that that's where Gregor Jordan's film sort of comes up in the same sort of thing. It's like, look, it doesn't have to be accurate to be entertaining. And I think that when they make films like this, it's like they are looking at outside audiences. And I believe I've shown this to Gabe as well. There's a preview for this, which came out at the time, and it must have been made for an American audience. And it's talking about Ned Kelly. He came to this country. It's like, dude, he was born here.
Yeah.
Don't say that he came from another place. That's just ridiculous. Stop it. So again, little things like that sort of they irk me with it. Orlando Bloom is shocking in it. I can't forgive him for anything in that. He's just terrible. And I believe I've seen an interview with him. He didn't know who Ned Kelly was before he signed on to the film, and didn't do his research. He just didn't care because he was riding on such a big high at the time, and he's obviously quite important for them to do it. My favorite performance in it is Joel Edgerton, though. Across the board, there are some great performances, but I think he nailed that role of Aaron Sherritt in it.
He is good.
And Jeffrey Rush, I think, who probably the only one with a real beard in the movie, he was excellent. Really, really, really good. But there's some great performances in it. I actually even like Bernard Fanning just singing Morton Bay in that. It's just really good. Like there's some really, really great moments in the film. It's beautifully shot. It does have some weird moments in it. I think the guy who plays Dan, I can't think of his name. He was terrible. But Chris McQuaid, who played Ellen, I thought was fantastic. She actually played my mother in an episode of Stingers one time, which was kind of weird. But she's quite good. She was very good in it. I like the film a lot, and I like it a lot more now. I softened a lot more on it after talking to Gabe and his passion for it as well. I softened a lot more on the film, and have grown to love it a lot more. I think that when I saw it the first time, what disappointed me was it got to the end and it ended. And I was used to sort of thinking a Ned Kelly story, we're going to see the trial, we're going to see the whole end of it. But it was like he just gets on the train and just goes off, and so that's the end. I'm like, no.
But I think in some respects, and I think this every time I watch the film, one of the most powerful things I think is that ending. Because I thought the same thing, when I was a kid and I was like sitting there, watching the film in the cinemas, and I was so caught up with it. But the way it just ends, and like I love that final bit in the train where the kids are waving at him, and yes, all right, he's now the cage line. You're looking at him through the bars. I get it. But I still don't think that justifies why the circus is there. But the way it tracks off in that beautiful Bernard Fanning song that plays over the end credits, "Shelter for My Soul," and the final sort of captions on the screen talking about the trial and talking about Ned Kelly being hanged, and then fading away just to that one last thing. He was 25 years old.
Yeah.
And every time that gets me, because we all know intellectually Ned Kelly was 25 years old when he died. But like it's when you see his whole life like play out in that film, and mostly it's what happens, give or take an affair with Naomi Watts, but mostly it's a fairly broad strokes, but fairly correct, sketch of the events of this man's life. It leaves out quite a bit as well. There are quite a few other sort of amazing things that happened in his life. But then to get to the end and say he was 25 years old after all of that, I mean, that's just something that like floors me every time I see it, because you almost forget like that he did so much, and that his life was so dramatic and so marked by tragedy and by terrible choices that were both inflicted on him and committed by him. And then to get to that at the end, I don't know, it's so simple, but it just hits me like a freight train every time.
Yeah, that hit me. I was
Absolutely.
like, oh crap, he was 25. So it was kind of like, oh, he did all this stuff happened and he was still a very young man. No, I think this movie is very earnest. And I think a lot of Australians aren't always used to very earnest Australian movies. We're used to it when it comes from, say, from overseas and we like it, but we're given an Australian movie that is pure earnest and kind of maybe a little bit more open-hearted, because I was like, oh my God, this movie's so melodramatic, but then it's being earnest about what it's doing. So I think sometimes Australians just want to go, no, that was something. So I think that's why it kind of gets clowned on a little bit. I will agree with the beards and the wigs. I think it's got some really amazing. This movie looks incredible. I mean, just the way it shows off like rural Victoria is absolutely perfect. But I think the movie's kind of got maybe one too many aims of what it's trying to do. Like the script is telling this really gorgeous like outlaw Irish story because it is about Irish immigrants. And I think it was Justin, you said there was this kind of hierarchy and anti-Irish sentiment because they were considered less than. So you've sort of got that kind of element to it as well, where Ned Kelly kind of fits in with the colonies and the fact that he's Irish. And then I think you have the Heath Ledger movie star of it all, and kind of it's got every single major actor in Australia at the time in it. Naomi Watts, Heath Ledger, Joel Edgerton, and of course Jeffrey Rush. It's kind of this showcase. Rachel Griffith shows up at one point. Like it's kind of got this who's who of Australian actors kind of showing off. I guess Australia was going through that second wave of amazing movies from the late 90s up to the mid 2000s, and we're sort of showing off what we can do, which is at odds with the script. And then you have this other layer of kind of really making Ned Kelly, and which is, I think you can make made up stories about Ned Kelly. He's so amenable, I can't think of the word. Like you can just make him anything you want because there's so much conjecture about who he was, what his motivations were, what exactly he was trying to do at the end of the day, or was he just reacting to everything that was happening to him? You can just kind of paint whatever you want. And the fact that these both are kind of based on literary works kind of fits in with that Australian telling a yarn kind of thing. So I think it's trying to do, I think you can kind of see people kind of putting what they want this movie to be, and sometimes those things don't quite mesh together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I find really interesting about it was, I mean, before, we're recording today, but I watched both films back to back yesterday, which is fascinating. Like, I really, really recommend, if anybody's interested, watching them both, because, you could scarcely think of two more
Which order did
different.
you do it in?
I
Which
did
order did you
True
put in?
History first, because I watched Ned Kelly fairly often. So I was sort of like, look, if I don't have time to watch both of them, then True History is the one that I have to refresh my memory on. Then I finished it and I found myself actually quite keen to watch Ned Kelly straight away to sort of look at the contrast. And it's funny because after watching True History, which is a far more cynical and hard-edged movie, like you watch something like Ned Kelly and it almost comes off as a bit too earnest. Like to agree with you on that, Lindsay, it does, particularly contrast with True History. But also, I don't know if it's the fact that I still had the kind of more subversive True History taste in my mouth when I watched it, but I think that this film really depicts a Ned Kelly who is just an outright hero. Like even the horse theft that happens at the start of it, it's not his fault. It's a case of mistaken identity or misunderstanding and everything, which is probably historically not what happened, even though that's what he claimed happened and everything. And I think that there's this fascinating thing with Ned Kelly that if you go onto any Ned Kelly Facebook page today and look at this play out, you will be shocked by the vitriol and the anger that is still flung at people on the two different camps of this story. People who are on, I guess, ostensibly the cop side, then people who are on the Kelly side. And to me, I've come to land in this place with it, and this comes from me having read a few years ago the really exemplary book Glenrowan by Ian Shaw, which is effectively a forensic history of the siege of Glenrowan, but not told from the point of view of the Kellys or the cops, but from the point of view of mainly the hostages and the people who survived that. And you suddenly realize this isn't some grand opera of cops and robbers. It's like there were real normal people going about their lives who were forever traumatized and damaged by what happened here. And Ned Kelly has a lot to answer for. And the truth of it is that his plan to derail the train in Glenrowan, had he succeeded, he wouldn't be a martyr or a hero. He'd be a terrorist. There's no way around it. Now, all of that said, the pro-police side love to play up this notion that that Ned was just pure villain and the cops were all in the right and everything. And I read a few years ago as well, Black Snake, written by Leo Kennedy, he was the great grandson of Michael Kennedy, who died at Stringy Bark Creek. And it's a fascinating book because when you read it and you read about Michael Kennedy's life and who this guy was, and by all accounts, upstanding, decent member of the community. But I also feel like that book bends over backwards to try to justify so many of the other cops in the stories, including Fitzpatrick, who were not decent men in a lot of cases. And the truth of it is, like, I don't think logically you can take all these people who are in many cases the sons of convicts, send them out to outposts with very little training, give them a gun and give them power over the Irish who are already downtrodden, and expect that they're not going to abuse that power. I mean, to me, there was a royal commission into the police force after the siege of Glenrowan. You can't tell me that they were all acting above board and they were all really decent and everything. So I look at a case where it's like, there's probably fuel being thrown on the fire from both sides here, and that doesn't mean that the cops are pure evil. It doesn't mean that Ned Kelly was pure good, but I do think that the way that this film depicts Ned is very, and I still like it because clearly I prefer this film to The True History of the Kelly Gang, and I probably, because I have that nostalgic thing baked into me, I probably like a heroic romantic Ned Kelly story more than I like something a bit more cynical. But I do think that we're probably crying out for a take on Ned Kelly that isn't so clear in its biases. I think that there need to be more looks at Ned Kelly that actually really just look at the brutal, complex reality of both sides and what it meant for the people who went through this, because I think we've moved beyond pure hero Ned Kelly, and I think we've moved beyond pure villain Ned Kelly. And this film definitely, makes no bones about the fact that it's in the hero camp. Like, every bad thing Ned does effectively an accident, or it's justified. Everything's in very heroic shots. Everything's, the camera loves Heath, and Heath loves the camera. And I just think that now it feels quaint. It feels quaint in a way that I still will always enjoy. But I do think, in terms of this film ever being considered remotely definitive in terms of fictional depiction of Ned Kelly, that's probably one of the areas in which I think it falls short.
Especially now that we also have Chopper, which would have been about 2 or 3 years before this movie came out, which is right. Chopper Reed, mm-hmm. which is another definitely criminal. There is no bones about Chopper being innocent of anything. But he was this kind of very visible figure in Fitzroy. So if you go to Fitzroy, there was a chance you would have just, see Chopper Reed crossing the street. He did book tours. He read a whole bunch of books. He was in prison multiple times. He was incredibly violent. That movie comes out, and it is that complex look of how this man has kind of gotten into this weird folk hero thing, which I'm still like, really? But he's entertaining, and he's got this kind of softer side where he can make a joke before he stabs you. But it's got that, again, that very complex, the cops aren't good, he's not good, yet there's kind of that more complex kind of issue, especially how he fits into the Melbourne landscape, or the Victorian landscape. And I think one thing I will say, because in the Gregor version, he is such the hero, he's kind of above everything a little bit. But yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it's Heath Ledger. I mean, he's a movie star, so it's kind of difficult in that respect to go, well, how else do you play him a little bit, even though because he hadn't done the Joker yet, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I think that if you look at so much of what's been written about Ned Kelly's life, both by other people and by Ned Kelly himself in something like the Drilled Letter, I mean, the picture that gets painted is an extraordinarily complex man. I mean, the Drilled Letter itself is such a blazing piece of writing. It's like, even, and a lot of it is quoted fairly verbatim in the Gregor Jordon film. I mean, Juzzy, you mentioned before the scene of the bank robbery and jewelry being the best scene in the film. I agree completely. And one of the reasons it's so good is that it's Ned's words. It's all Ned's words. words. And some of the turns of phrase in there, I mean, man, it gives me goosebumps every time. Like neglect this and abide by the consequences, which
And
shall
what's
be
great
worse than
about
the
that
rust
is,
and the wheat. I am a widow's son outlawed, and my orders must be obeyed. I mean, holy crap, man! Like this is an extremely articulate, extremely clever, extremely forceful and passionate man, but he's also a man with an enormous persecution complex. And so the question here becomes how much of that persecution complex was earned and how much of it was made up by himself. And the answer is probably a mix of both. In truth, like the answer probably is a mix, because people who are pro-police will often say there were plenty of other people who had lives just as hard as the Kellys, and they didn't turn to crime the way Ned did. So, and there's also questions about the Fitzpatrick incident. Was Ned actually there or not? The Gregor Jordon film, he's busy off being amorous with Naomi Watts in that film, so he has nothing to do with what happens with Fitzpatrick. But, there's a lot of conjecture about that still to this day. So, I think that complexity is often missing in how Ned is depicted in a lot of these movies. And that's something that I think, it's going to be very hard to do while public opinion on Ned Kelly remains so starkly divided, and it does remain starkly divided to this day. It's like that you find very, very few people who sit squarely in the middle on Ned Kelly. If you've got an opinion about Ned Kelly, chances are you are going to lean strongly one way or the other way. And it's very easy to fall into those camps, because based on whatever perspective you adopt on this, it's easy to see the romantic Robin Hood story, and it's easy to see the rebels against authority terrorizing the innocent story. But I mean, it's real life. It's not either of those things.
Oh, I was going to say that, Gabe, the interesting point about that is people do have opinions on Ned Kelly and such as well. But again, how many of them know the whole story? They really see a very small snippet of that, and they use that as their catalyst. Oh, the cops were against him, so yeah, we got to go and he's the guy that sort of came about and stood up for everyone. And it's like, yeah, but do you know why he was going to derail the train? Do you know that part of the story? So, oh no, but he was persecuted, and they don't really give you all that sort of
No.
thing. So, like, there are some people that we know who know a lot about the story, but I don't feel like it's as well documented now for a lot of people.
And people pick and choose, I think. And I think a lot of people who write extensively about this history are guilty of this. There's people on the anti-Kelly side love to talk about. There's this urban legend that I don't know if urban legend's the right word for it, given it was in rural Victoria, but like this idea that at Stringy Bark Creek, the Kellys shot 4 bullets into Lonergan's body, 1 each, as a kind of bonding thing, but there were only 3 bullets found in his body, 1 of which presumably killed him. So you can't and there are books you read where they cite both of those things, and I'm like, well, both those things can't be true. And people who are pro Kelly love to overlook exactly what was going on at Glenrowan, or at least try to justify it. I think Ian Jones, maybe, who's the preeminent Kelly historian who wrote what is considered one of the definitive books on him, A Short Life, I think he even said, because he posited this theory that Ned's aim was to start a republic of northeastern Victoria, which I think, don't come at me if I'm wrong on this, but I think that's been fairly roundly debunked. But even Ian Jones, I believe, is quoted as somewhere saying, if it wasn't this act of greater political significance, then Glenrowan was, pretty unjustifiable in a lot of ways, or at least what was intended to happen there. So I don't know. I do think that, that your opinion on this probably is colored enormously by what you've read. And also, we're talking about events that happened, 150 years ago. So, how much do you know about this? The papers at the time were obviously very biased. The folklore is obviously very biased. So I don't know. I just think people are so staunch in their takes on this story, where I think you can afford to allow a little bit more ambiguity and a little bit more, I just don't know, into it, because you don't know. You weren't there. You just don't know what actually happened. And we can sort of, I think the healthiest thing to do is to collate as many different takes on this from as many different angles as possible, and sort of arrive at your own conclusion on it, but sort of accept that you're never really going to know.
I think that's what you bring up as a very good point as well. Like, people who are very staunch on their ideas of Ned Kelly and all that sort of stuff, then True History of the Kelly Gang is definitely not a film for them. At all. People who hero worship Ned in the way that, getting tattoos of such is life and so on, they're not the people who are going to really enjoy some of the more interesting parts of True History of the Kelly Gang, are they?
No, but I think with Ned Kelly is he's because everything I knew about him was kind of baked in myth. He was this larger than life figure. He's no longer really a person. So I think that's why people have such strong ideas of, because they're imprinting what they want on him to be, whether he was this completely evil figure that had to be taken down, or whether he is the greatest folk hero that Australia ever produced. And the thing is somewhere in the middle, but I think because we don't know a lot, because there are too many gaps in the story that we know of, and there's just these couple of big events. I mean, the Glenn Rowan thing would have been insane, just to be kind of there, and all of a sudden you're being told, oh well, no, you have to stay in the inn because we're going to be doing this, and you're just like, wait, hang on, I don't want to get involved in a shootout with the police, and they're all here for you, so it's kind of completely terrifying. Or
and don't forget as well, from a historical point of view, there were people who turned up to watch.
Exactly.
Actually stood and spectators watching the entire thing unfolding as well, which again, to actually see that moment in history as a bystander, just what, and there were friends and family just sitting there watching the whole thing play out.
That feels like a very Australian thing.
Actually sort of think about it,
Oh, 100%. And I just with one thing I think, talking about Glenn Rowan, that like, you know, that really kind of hammers home, I think, this film's bias is the scene at the inn, which I still love watching. I find very rousing today, where, you know, the police open fire and they shoot some of the hostages, and the hostages run back inside, and then the Kelly gang walk out in their armor, and the police open fire, and the bullets are bouncing off, and the music sort of swells, and all the cops like, what's going on? And they all raise their guns at once, start taking out cops left, right, and center, and you're like, wow, what an amazing scene. Except it didn't happen. It just didn't happen that way at all. You know, like, the armor was, even Joe Burns said to Ned Kelly, I told you this bloody armor would bring us to ruin. Like, it, you know, the armor screwed them over. It was too heavy. They couldn't move properly. The cops very quickly realized, shoot at their legs. One policeman got shot in the wrist. One got a graze on his head. That's the worst that happens to the police in this story, you know? So it's, and yeah, you know, like the police also did open fire on hostages. That's true. And it's also true that the Kelly gang took the hostages and kept them there, you know? So, you know, all of those things kind of have to be kind of factored in, I think, in how we talk about it. And I think that the thing with Ned Kelly that I think is so fascinating as well, and there are many things I find fascinating about it, is the fact that I think because we were at that point, like, colonial Australia was a very young country, and we didn't have our own culture. We didn't have our own defining myth. And we had then the Eureka Stockade, and we had Ned Kelly. And these are stories that have defined so much of Australian national identity in so many ways. And there's that great bit, we'll get into true history soon, obviously, but there's a bit at the end of that film where Kurzel says in the State Library, what is it about us Australians that means that we worship a horse thief and a murderer? And I mean, what it is that what he symbolizes, and the armor has a huge amount to do with it because it's so immediately striking and iconic, but what he symbolizes, like, in the national consciousness, is fighting against authority. It's standing up for what's, you know, right, even though it's arguable whether that's actually what he did or not. And I think that it's telling that he so quickly became a folk hero after his death because I think the country was in desperate need of it. And I think that the complexities of that legacy are something that we've culturally been grappling with ever since, you know?
No, I mean, it is. I mean, if you're gonna do a massive action scene with the armor, you might as well do it the way that Jordon shot it, which is they all step up, they all raise the gun, and it turns into a massive shootout. That is just visually more interesting. It's visually more kick-ass, and if you're going to use you've got the armor there, you might as well just make it look cool, which Kurzel does not do, which I admire him for. I'm like, oh, we're doing this. Okay.
And they're wearing dresses.
And they're wearing dresses while doing it. Good on them. But it's this very kind of thing, and I think it speaks into how Australian just deals with its own mythology. We kind of we didn't have it, and so we just kind of had to make it up as we went along. And it is kind of drawn to these figures that are very complex, that we don't know how to add complexity to. It's these very outside the system. It's very outside. It's very kind of standing up for what is right. But oftentimes it's, no, I just want to rob the bank because
100%.
I want the money, which is very Ned Kelly. Like, I was kind of going, oh wait, so he committed no crime. Like, he was a bushranger. That's what he did. He stole horses. He robbed banks. Even Robin Hood, because this movie actually reminded me a lot of the Ridley Scott Robin Hood with actually Russell Crowe, how it is kind of playing with that mythology and just kind of making him into more of a human being, but at the same time recognizing that Robin Hood is a hero and all that kind of stuff. But I think Australia has a very complex way of adoring our heroes, and they are often very loved and hated within the same breath by different people. And I think Ned Kelly, and this movie is just a really good example of how they do that. And it's very hard to explain to if you're making a movie for an overseas market, it's very hard to explain that. So you make Ned Kelly the ultimate hero.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, I'm not denying that
Very
like
much so.
it's not you know, as a kid who again was obsessed with this history, I mean that very rousing, uncomplicated, heroic version of Ned Kelly
It's cool.
is cool. And I mean, even a few years ago, I saw a one-off staged production. There was actually a Ned Kelly musical produced a few years ago called Ned the Musical, and they were trying to raise some money for it to give it like a proper big Melbourne showing. And so there was this one-off staged performance of it, like in concert back in 2017. And I went and saw that, and I thought it would be garbage. And it's not. It's fantastic. The music's really good. It's like a big, like Les Mis type, you know, sweeping musical epic. And this story, you know, lends itself so easily to that kind of telling. But,
Yeah.
you know, and look, honestly, I'm always going to gravitate more towards that type of telling for it because as a storyteller, it's irresistible. You know, those beats of hero standing up against authority Ned Kelly are they're right there. You know, it's hard to
Exactly.
tell an alternate version of it. And I think I think the story does suit it in the telling. And I think there is a continuously open question into whether creating a cultural myth, or whether sort of creating cultural myth by sacrificing authenticity or complexity is justifiable or is okay. And I think we're going to be having that debate probably forever. And, you know, so, you know, that lends itself to that. It always will. It always has. But I mean, I think that as an adult looking at it with a slightly more critical eye, you have to remind yourself that this isn't what happened, you know, and I think it's fine to be entertained by it. It's fine to be swept up by it. It's fine to have an affinity for the mythology, but it's not really real. And I think it's important to know that.
I think that is a thing for a lot of historical movies that they like when Gladiator 2 came out, I heard so many criticisms about they would never have done the Gladiator shows like the way that they were doing the Gladiator 1 and 2. And I'm like, no, because it's a movie. You have to do it so you're looking at it and you're entertained by the visual. And I think again, I think when you're telling the story, the facts are kind of going to get squished a little bit unless you were doing like a documentary or you were doing something out that is able to contain a more factual basis. Would you agree, Justin?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Look, I love Gladiator 2. It's a strange film.
Yes.
There are things in it that I think are incredibly absurd, but there's some great performances in it. And Dondus was the best character in the whole thing.
Hail Dondus.
Hail Dondus.
Dondus. Hail Dondus. Yeah, I like Gladiator too. I thought it was good. Look, it's a carbon copy of the original. And if that's what you're looking for, if you want to see a Gladiator movie, then that's pretty much it. It gives you exactly what you're looking for. It says exactly what it does on the box. You know, and I think it works for that. And that's again, are we making enough films that are like that? You know, there are people who just want to see a hero movie, and that's what you get effectively with that. F1 was another great example. That's not a particularly complicated movie. Was it entertaining? Was it predictable? Absolutely. Both of those things. But again, it's just a hero type movie, isn't it? So that's, I guess, what you kind of get with when you're trying to do that sort of thing.
No, yeah, I mean, it's the hero's journey, and the hero's journey has certain beats that you have to do, and sometimes they are just going to look really cool, like that bank robbery scene. Like my favorite scene is with Rachel Grethus when she's like completely seducing Orlando Bloom. He does not know what's happening.
No.
But yeah, there are certain beats that I think a movie or a fictional telling of something is going to have to go. So I'm not as angry when I'm watching something. I'm like, oh, well, that's just not accurate. I'm like, well, it's kind of a movie. You kind of you can't always just do the true story. Otherwise, it gets way too messy, way too complicated. But you can do that in a documentary form because that's
Sure.
doing what it needs to do. Anything else you want to say about Gregor movie before we move on to the true story of the Kelly Gang?
Look, like Gabe said as well, I was on the fence with it for a very long time with the Gregor Jordon version, and have softened a lot more and watch it more often now than I usually would have. Again, it's a terrific film, and I think that the difference between this the Gregor Jordon movie and the Justin Kurzel one, which we're about to talk about now, is watchability. I will go back and watch the Gregor Jordon movie several times a year. The Justin Kurzel movie, which I've just watched again for the first time since it first came out, I think it'll be a very, very long time before I watch it again. Not to say that I didn't enjoy watching it, but I don't think it has the watchability to go, oh, I'm just going to put on True History again. I just don't think but that's just my take.
Yeah.
But that
Well, I
might
mean,
be different for everyone else.
I see, like, to me, Ned Kelly, and again, look, I have to stress over and over again how much this is colored by nostalgia, but at the same time, it's like that film is a comfort watch for me in the same way that something like Troy is. You know, it's something that, like, I've watched at a very formative time in my life that I like a lot, that, you know, was fairly derided, and yet I still retain a soft spot for it. And with time, it's developed from a guilty pleasure into just a pleasure where I say, no, I actually think it's a good film. And, you know, I don't really get why it's so, and that's true of Troy as well. I don't really get why it's so derided. But look, I think with this film, one thing that I think it isn't appreciated enough for, and this might be semi-controversial, it might not be, it's just what occurs to me whenever I watch it, is that it feels to me like it's kind of, in some respects, an indication of a type of Australian film that we could make, but we don't. You know, the big romantic, sweeping, sort of epic type films that really could stand shoulder to shoulder with any Hollywood blockbuster you'd care to name, at least in terms of appearance and presentation. I mean, you can't deny that it's a competently made film, even if you don't really like what it's saying or how it's going about saying it. But, you know, to see an Australian film that is so many high-end actors, so many well-known actors, shot like a Hollywood blockbuster and everything, and on that scale, I kind of wish we made more of them. I wish we made more films that had this
100%.
sort of this
Is
kind
it
of
a
big
funding
Hollywood
thing?
sweep to them.
Is it a funding thing that we don't, or is it just like because a resource thing, or is it just because for some reason Australians just prefer really tight, small,
Look,
bleak,
I
artsy?
think it's probably a bit of both. You know, I mean, Australia's got a very different filmmaking model to most other places in the world, in that there's a big contingent of government funding as opposed to, you know, investors and stuff in America. Look, I don't know enough about this to be able to speak to with authority. So any Australian filmmakers listening, I'm not trying to, you know, make any claims that I can't back up here or anything like that. This is just my understanding of it. But I think that, you know, there isn't as much money to make Australian films going around in general as there is in America. You know, we know that. That's the truth of it. I do think that we probably do, because of the cultural cringe element that you mentioned before, Lindsay, where, you know, earnestness isn't something that we probably gravitate towards that much in our own art and culture. That's probably a factor too. But that doesn't mean I don't think that there isn't room for it. And if, you know, whether it's feasible to make more films like this, whether there's demand to make more films like this, I mean, True History of the Kell Gang came out in 2020, so we're probably about 10 years away from another Ned Kelly film, you know, so maybe that'll be the time and somebody will do it again. But I mean, you know, the question is going to remain, and I think True History has to grapple with this in some respects. What is there to do with this story that hasn't been done before? And to me, I think that is the version that actually tries to be accurate. That's what I really, or at least tries to grapple with the complexity of it while not going completely off the rails. But yeah, I don't know whether maybe we have to look away from bushranging films in order to make these kinds of movies, or historical films to make these kinds of movies. I don't know, but I just do think that it suggests something that we maybe could be better at than we think we are. Maybe if there was more embracing of it. I don't know, from a financial perspective or a cultural perspective.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
As a history nut myself, anything along those lines, it's been a very long time since we've seen a convict era sort of thing. Like, Australian history is very rich and very colourful, very interesting. But again, is it marketable at the moment? Probably not as much. And it certainly would not have a particularly healthy amount of diversity in it. If it did as well, it would be very much a very specific type of people who are in this, and it might not necessarily be as palatable to the audiences if it was just completely like that. But yeah, it's a shame we don't see enough Australian history sort of blockbusters, which we do have an opportunity to do. There's some great stories in Australia.
The Eureka Stockade has been crying out for a proper depiction
I'm
for a long,
surprised
long time.
that has not tackled that, because Australian historical movies tend to be dark. I mean, I'm talking Nightingale, kind
Yeah,
of
comes to
thing.
mind.
It's
Yep.
that kind of, I mean, they are expensive to make because you do have to have the specific costuming and everything like that, and
Yep.
the blocking and maybe building sets. So they are expensive things. And as Gabe said, we just don't have always the funding to be able to do those kind of things. But every time you do, they are. And Australia does have a habit of making really dark movies. That's not to say the Jordon movie doesn't have darkness to it, because it is ultimately a tragedy. But it just, yeah, you're right. We don't tend to make these very earnest movies. We tend to make even the one movie I loved from Australia this year, Beast of War, which does have a hopeful ending, is still
I
very
love Beast of War.
Beast of War rules, but it's still
It's
very
so good.
Still need to watch it.
still, you will be eaten by you just survived this bomb and you have a massive head injury, then you'll be eaten by a shark kind of thing. So it's kind of
I saw that in Sydney. I was up on book tour in Sydney, and I had a night off, and I was wandering around the place with nothing to do. And I walked into the George Street Cinema. Well, actually, I messaged you first, Lindsay.
You did, yes.
On, and I asked you, "Is Beast of War good?" And you were like, "Yeah, it is." I still wasn't sure I was going to watch it, and I walked in, and I was like, and the two films that were on at the time that suited me were One Battle After Another and Beast of War. And I sat there, kind of looking at the film titles, being like, 3-hour-long contemporary relevance. Oscar contender or Shark. Shark.
And also
it's
72 minutes. It's like really
it's so much. It's just like it doesn't outstay its welcome. It's entertaining as hell. I loved it. I thought it was great.
Yeah, but it's got that cynical edge to it, which I don't think which always Australian movies always have to have.
The is glorious. Like it's so bloody. It's so savage. It's so pulpy. I mean, Japanese fighter pilot surviving a bombing and emerging through the smoke with a samurai sword on a bit of debris, and you're just like, oh shit! Like, oh, I love it. I love it so much.
It is a really great movie. Actually, go see Beast of War, please. But yeah, just the first thing came to an example. But it's so good. So we might as well jump into a movie that, if anyone says commercial instinct or kind of linear storytelling to Kurzel, he'll go, no, we're doing this, which is the true history of the Kell Gang.
£15 you cost me. And you can earn that back.
I were but a child, yet I were already travelling full tilt toward the man I would become.
The child assassin.
The butcher!
Is the man, the myth, the legend? What makes you think I won't kill you right now?
Sure not the man you pretend to be. I'd rather see to it that your kind suffer. Either side of that whore you call a mother.
I've got no choice but to lock you up.
Your son intends to rescue you.
You good boy.
You go out there and be a big man.
Load up! 3, 2, 1. You always want to build an army? We're going to war. Fire! You're bloody bulletproof, boys!
Justin, we'll start with you. So you saw it in 2019 going, yes, there's another Ned Kelly movie. I'm going to sit down and watch this. And then you were showing a movie I think I like probably most out of the three of us, but you sat down and you went, what is this?
Yeah. So Gabe and I somehow ended up at the wrap party for this movie before it actually came out.
You did?
We would usually quite often drink at the John Curtin Hotel in Carlton because it was around the corner from where we used to work. And we were there one night when the actual wrap party happened to be on. So we actually were there with, I'm pretty sure I ended up getting a bunch of drinks on the tab, which I definitely shouldn't have been getting. But talking to people like George McKay and Sean Keenan at the whole thing as well. And it was quite interesting because we were really excited. I remember hearing a new Ned Kelly film's coming out. Freaking awesome. Really excited to see because I just like the idea of a new film coming out. And it was a very different take on it. I believe we went and saw it. Was it the Lido we went, Gabe, when we went and saw it?
We saw it with our friend John Erasmus, who was the assistant editor on the film. So we had that connection as well. So no, we went because they did like a couple of early screenings before it came out on Stan here in Australia, and so we went and saw it at the at the movies.
So we actually
Quite a
saw
big group
it in a
of us from
cinema as
memory.
well.
Yeah.
So we actually saw it on big screen because it was majorly a Stan release, I think.
Yes.
Is how it was majorly sort of put out.
Stan
And
original.
it's very
yes.
limited in the cinemas, but yeah. So there wasn't a lot of screenings at the cinema, but we did go and see it at the cinema, and it was a surprise. I think it was not what I expected.
Had you read the?
It's a very strange.
Had you read the novel?
I hadn't.
Okay.
No, I hadn't read the book. No, so I'd not read the book. But being an enthusiast about Ned Kelly at the time as well, I'm like, okay, cool, and wasn't expecting it to be as surreal as what it came with. I mean, we talked about like weird, silly beards in the Gregor Jordon movie. This is a Ned Kelly movie where Ned Kelly doesn't have a beard, which is one of the more striking features of Ned Kelly. If anyone's seen a picture of the man, he's a dude with a beard. And George McKay does not have a beard in this, and I'm not quite sure what the reasoning for not having that is, but obviously it's just to delineate that this is a different sort of character, or maybe portray the younger version or youth, I guess. But that was a strange thing for me to sort of get through. Like, waiting for when's he going to have the beard? It's not going to happen.
He has a mullet because he's a punk. That is.
He does have a mullet. He does. He does have a mullet. But there's great performances in it. I've got to say, I find it an interesting film, but I don't find, like I said before, I don't find it as watchable as the previous one we were talking about. I mean, I've seen it now a couple of times, and it'd probably be a long time before I pick it up again. Not to say that there's not some great stuff in it. I just didn't find it as watchable as previous versions, I guess.
No, it's a movie that's holding you at arm's length on purpose. Gabe, your general reaction when you when you saw it back in 2019?
I think I've got to yeah, okay. So watching it again for this podcast was the first time I'd watched it since it came out. I think, I'm a really, really big believer in you've got to meet films where they are. You know, you've got to try to meet a film on the level that it's working at, as opposed to what you think it would be, or it should be, which is obviously a more difficult thing if you're talking about an adaptation or a depiction of historical events or anything, because everybody's going to have their own idea about how that should be done. Like, for example, I went and saw Springsteen Deliver Me From Nowhere recently, and I'm a massive Bruce Springsteen fan, and I have personally never really found the making of Nebraska, that album, particularly interesting. I think there are far more interesting stories in Bruce Springsteen's life. It's not the Bruce Springsteen biopic that I would have wanted to see, but actually going in sort of, meeting it on its level and thinking, all right, this is the story it's chosen to tell. Like, in taken on these terms, how successful is it? And it's a very successful movie, And so with this, I feel kind of similarly. Like, I basically was kind of aided by the fact that I had some forewarning of what it was going to be doing. And a lot of that came from going to the rap party and, or, maybe more accurately, gate crashing the rap party and seeing the early footage that was shown there and sort of realizing, oh, this is a very, very different take. This is a really weird and kaleidoscopic and surreal and hard edge take where it's packed with anachronisms, and the Kell Gang are all wearing dresses. And I'd read the Peter Carey book, but the Peter Carey book, I really like that book. I think it's really fantastic. And it's also it gets a lot of flack for not being accurate, but it's more true to the story than people think, or that its reputation tends to suggest. Like, it has some additions in there, like the Sons of Sieve, the idea that these Irish rebels would wear dresses to fight the English oppressors, or giving Ned Kelly a secret daughter and a secret wife and everything. But in general, I think that book's a really great version of the Kelly story. But it's not really that book that this film is adapting, like that book is kind of written to be Ned Kelly in his own words. And this is sort of Ned Kelly done through a 70s punk aesthetic. Now, I kind of wasn't looking forward to rewatching it, not because I didn't particularly enjoy it the first time, I actually didn't mind it the first time, but I certainly came out of it being like, you know what, it's not my flavor of Ned Kelly. It's a very radical take. I appreciate it for what it is doing. I was really fascinated to watch the vitriol that came its way from Ned Kelly enthusiasts at the time. I remember when it was released on Steam, there was a Facebook post, and the comments under it was like all some variants on what the fuck is this, you know? And so I think if you didn't have that forewarning of what it was going to be, it would be really jarring. But when you actually see it and you sort of know it's going to be doing something very different, it's going to be deliberately anachronistic, it's going to be messing with history at every turn. It's actually quite an enjoyable movie. And that was really affirmed for me watching again yesterday, because I sort of put it on being like, oh God, is it going to be, you know, because particularly knowing how watchable I find the Gregor Jordon film clearly and the fondness I retain for that film, this was sort of the one I was looking forward to less, because it's not an accessible film. It's not a warm film. It's not a earnest film. But I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it. You know, it's beautifully shot. It's really well made. The performances are great. I mean, Russell Crowe's fantastic. Nicholas Hoult steals the film. Essie Davis is brilliant. George McKay is really, really good as a character who isn't really Ned Kelly, but isn't really supposed to be either. And I mean, I think my only real qualm with it, because I actually find it very watchable and very entertaining and never less than interesting. It's not a boring movie. You're never bored in that film. And I mean, the kind of insane kaleidoscopic strobe light take on the Siege of Glenrowan at the end is just, you know, like fascinating. Also, the fact that we don't even get to Stringy Butt Creek until 2/3 through the movie. I mean, in the Greg Jordan film, we're there 1/4 of the way through the movie.
And it's almost glossed over as well.
Yeah, and then it's like,
and instead of stealing the watch, he cuts
like it glosses over.
Kind of weird.
I mean, speed runs Stringy Butt Creek, and then it sort of glosses over the bank robberies. It cuts out Aaron Sherritt altogether. You know, there are so many of the familiar touchstones of this story that this film just doesn't even explore. But again, you got to meet it where it is, and it's not interested in exploring those things. My issue with it, I guess, from a critical standpoint, is that as fascinating as I find it, and as much as it gives me to chew on and think about, and as much as I think it's a good film in its own right, I don't quite get what it's trying to do entirely.
I have a similar thing, because when I was sort of watching it, this is the first time I've sort of watched it, and watching it after a very earnest blockbuster-esque historical pageanty kind of version of it, and going into this, I kind of felt like the Gasworks had put on a production of the true history of the Kell Gang, but which I don't think that is mostly a compliment to it, because I think it's very strange and tactile, and it's got these really interesting things. But then I'm like, okay, but I get the themes that you're trying to do with it, but I don't understand what this has to do with Ned Kelly. I get that Ned Kelly is kind of this ultimate version of masculinity within Australia. Like, he's big, he's baddie, he'll take on everyone, and his ingenuity with the armor and all that kind of thing. And this is kind of breaking it down, where he's in a dress for like 60% of the movie, and it's a gorgeous dress, but so it's kind of doing that. But at the same time, the whole idea of he's almost trafficked for like 60% of it, and he's very passive. Like, he doesn't make any decisions himself until the point where he decides he's going to make a decision, and that is almost Glenrowan. Like, it feels like he skims over everything, and then that happens. Or kind of I don't quite know what its main aim was. It feels like it was overthinking it a little bit.
I think what you're saying is right there, Lindsay, as well. But and the thing I sort of found with it is, at no point do I feel like I sympathized with Ned Kelly's point in the true history. Not to a point where I'm like, oh shit, I believe in him and I want to root for him the entire way through. I don't feel like there was enough of that. And it's the same way when I look at true history, I kind of look at the same way as Solo, a Star Wars story. If you called Solo a Star Wars story, not about Han Solo, it's a kick-ass fucking movie.
Yeah.
But because it's Han Solo, you're like, well, hang on, now you've tied it to another character, and it's kind of a little bit dumb because that's not the character I know. I think true history is kind of along those sort of lines as well. It's like, okay, this could be a really, really good film, but because you've tied it to Ned Kelly, you've kind of, I don't know, maybe you just skewed it a little bit, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And I like the idea of doing that, like the idea of Solo, even if it did have the most atrocious line in it. What's your surname? Oh, what's your family name? I have none. Solo. But it's I mean, it was just sort of fascinating watching a movie with Heath Ledger, who is complete in control of it. He has an idea, he always has a plan, and he's always in charge. To watch it and I like George McKay is amazing in this, and I love his performance. I think he chooses really fascinating, complicated projects where you're just giving him side eye the whole entire time. But with this one, he is completely passive. He's letting other people kind of dictate what's going to happen to him until he doesn't. And it's a really weird switch. Like all of a sudden, the thing in the house happens with Fitzgerald, and then he decides that he's going to take on the whole entire police force in Australia, essentially.
But I wonder if, because the thing is, the film's so confident in how it's presented that I tend towards feeling like, I don't think it was made without intention. I think it's made with a lot of intention. I just can't
intention.
I can't quite figure out what that intention is, And so to me, when I get to that final line, where Kurzel has that bit in the state library where he says, why do we worship this horse thief and murderer? I'm like, well, that to me is the question that I think is most interesting about Ned Kelly in total. Not because I think that, that's all he was. I think he was a lot more than that, but because that question is a starting point to opening up far more fascinating questions about how myths change and grow and develop, who gets to tell what story, who shapes the narrative, how all these things play out. I mean, it's completely fascinating stuff.
You could have almost started the movie with that.
That's
you could
kind
have
of
almost
what I think.
started the movie with that.
But again, of course, I agree with you on that, because that's kind of my starting point. I say, well, that's sort of where if that was the question the film was exploring, I don't know why it was exploring it in this way. And so if I had to kind of question it or delve into it, I guess I would say, well, maybe by being so deliberately anachronistic, maybe by, by having them all wear fairly modern clothes, by having what looks to be electric lights in the Glenrowan Inn, by having very modern looking graffiti, by giving it this really punk sort of energy and look to it and everything, maybe what it's trying to do there is to put Ned Kelly in a recognizable modern lens to sort of make you think, what the modern version of him would be like and whether that actually is justifiable. But again, I don't quite know. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's a film that rewards discussion and analysis and questioning, which I really, really appreciate. And look, in a case of total personal taste, it's not the Ned Kelly film that I would gravitate towards or that I necessarily want to see, but it's not one that I think is wrong for existing in any way, shape, or form, despite what a lot of people online would say about it. I just kind of wish that I had a better handle on what its intentions actually are. And I'm completely the first to admit that, it could be that I'm missing something here, because I've seen it twice now and I still can't quite figure it out outside of, potential. Maybe it's this and maybe it's this, but I don't know. What do you have a take on this, Lindsay?
No, I mean, this is probably the movie I would go back to, just because it's in that place for me where I like dream, logic, surreal, artificial movies that you don't always know what the point is. So I'm a little bit more comfortable there. But no, I think because it is tied to Ned Kelly, I have no idea what that intention is either. And I was trying to figure it out as I was going along. So to get to Kurzel, and he says, why do we worship these horse thieves and murderers? I'm like, I didn't even know that was a question of the movie. It feels very, I mean, we're in the Victorian State Library, which is one of my favorite buildings ever, but it's kind of like, I don't quite know why we're asking that question, because nothing in that movie has asked me to either resent him or to feel empathy for him. He's this weird, gangly teenager, even when he's meek, a 25-year-old who doesn't know where he fits, which I guess is very punk. The way he's doing, he's just kind of this punk. But I think the movie's it feels like it's overthinking things too much. It's like, what if we did this? I was like, are the dresses a symbol for something? Then I read up, oh no, it's the secret society, and that makes sense with the protests, and then also the Luddites and all that kind of thing, which has nothing to do with that, but they also wore dresses to protest and break machinery. But it was just this kind of thing of I see what you're doing, I just don't, because you have put Ned Kelly in there, I don't know how any of this goes back to him. And it's like Justin said, because they've put Ned Kelly into this movie, now you're looking at it going, okay, so it's going to be about Ned Kelly, when I don't think the movie is as interested in Ned Kelly as you think it's going to be.
Well,
that makes
I
sense.
think as well. I don't think it's a film that's particularly interested in Ned Kelly. I think it's a film that is probably most fascinated with masculinity.
Yes.
Because I also think there's a few little ambiguities in the film that I think are really interesting. Like, for example, the fact that Charlie Hunnam's character is clearly supposed to be Ned's real father.
Yes.
And that's even more obvious on second viewing. The warmth he has towards Ned, the fact that when Ned shoots him, he's like quite, he's almost quite conciliatory and everything with him. And then the fact that Ned's real father, he finds out that his dad's wearing a dress and riding around and everything. But one thing I think is interesting there is that later on in the film, when Dan and Steve explain to Ned that they wear the dresses because it's part of this Irish secret society, they very pointedly mention that their mother told them that. And so I'm like, was it really? Or was that more a matter of the father actually was cross-dressing and that was the mother's sort of explanation for it that Dan and Steve just took and ran with? And so in that, there's something to unpack there about the ideas, a lie becoming a story, becoming mythology, becoming all the rest of it, becoming what this Ned Kelly story has become. But then also, of course, you've got Russell Crowe as Harry Power, which, again, the film's not interested in accuracy. It makes that very clear from the outset. So I think it's kind of redundant to criticize the film for being inaccurate. But at the same time is that, Harry Power in real life never killed anyone. He wasn't a murderer. But, to have Russell Crowe as this sort of very charming, very sort of old-fashioned Aussie bloke who Ned Kelly looks up to. He's brilliant in the film, but then
so good, yeah.
To get to the point where he kills the two men on the road, and Ned's so clearly horrified by that, and then so he doesn't think his father's man enough. I mean, that's very pointedly made clear by him bringing the slab of beef his father can't get to the family, and his mother, putting him at the head of the table and giving him the beef and saying, "Here, that is for the man of the house." But then he's got Charlie Hunnam's character, but he's a cop, and he's leaning on the family and demanding sexual favors from his mother and everything. And then you've got Russell Crowe, who's the type of man Ned wants to be until he's not. And then you've got Fitzpatrick, who turns up, who's this very different sort of effeminate dandy type character. And Ned kind of gets compelled by that as well. And then it sort of gets to the point where it's like there's all these different versions of what kind of man he could be. And the point where he snaps is the point where Fitzpatrick says to him, you're not a man, you're a boy waiting for a captain to tell him what to do. And at that point, Ned sort of becomes this culmination of all of those influences by the end.
Yes.
He's wearing the dresses and he's fighting and he's killing and he's crazy and everything. And so I guess through that lens, taking away the Ned Kelly of it all, it's a film about a young sort of anti-establishment punk guy in a rough situation, kind of taking on all these different things and becoming something all his own. But again, it's like, is that an idea that fits naturally onto a Ned Kelly film? Should this really be considered a Ned Kelly film? Because it's using the framework of that myth to explore a lot of other ideas. And it's, like in some ways,
it worked quite well as well. Like if you took Ned's name out of it, the film works quite well. I think I think that connection to that name kind of makes you look at it in a different way.
I think that's kind of simultaneously the provocation of the film and possibly where it frustrates, because if you look at the outcry that it was met with, and if you look at all the comments on the Stan post and everything about it, I mean, if you call it the true history of the Kelly Gang, and even the Peter Carey book, the irony of the title was always that it's not true history of the Kelly Gang, it's Ned Kelly's version of that history. So I mean, that's always been baked in, but most people don't know that, and so they're coming along and being like, "Oh, cool, Ned Kelly film." Then you go, "Wait, hang on, why is Ned Kelly wearing a dress? Why is there no beard? What's going on here? Why is there all this kind of punk style music and everything?" So I get why people sort of have an outcry to it, because it does come with a certain expectation. But I also think that the Kelly myth is ripe for being challenged. I'm just not really sure that this is challenging the myth so much as it is, unpacking different forms of masculinity and how somebody makes their own version out of, the fragmented pieces that they've been served throughout their life.
That's
a good way to put it.
That's a very good way of putting it, because I think it is actually doing that. Because I think when I was watching it, even though I fell in love with the style, like as soon as you see Nicholas Hoult come in, and then because I just love there's a lot of male nudity in this movie, and it's all the same, like they're all crossed their legs, so you don't quite see the groin, but everyone does it. Charlie Hunnam's naked, Nicholas Hoult is naked, pretty sure the dad's naked. There's this very specific type of nudity that happens. But again, if Ned Kelly was a real person, even though throughout history he's become a not real person. But when you're watching it, you realize that George McKay isn't playing a person at all. He's playing a construct. And I think that's an interesting way of looking at a historical figure, But again, this historical figure has kind of weaved its way into the fabric of how a lot of Australians see themselves. So I think the movie's trying to piss off people. I don't think this is a movie that
I
is
agree with that.
going,
Yeah.
yeah, this is not a movie that's sort of going, hey, let's have, I'm going to show you something. It's like this movie's coming out with middle fingers ablazing to go, fuck you.
100%. And that's, I mean, I don't mind that as such. You know, I think that I do think that sacred cows need to be sort of made a mockery of at different times and everything. Again, you know, that doesn't mean it's the kind of Ned Kelly film that I necessarily want or gravitate towards, but it is, you know, there's always something. There's always going to be that slight part of me that sort of giggles a little bit when something like this comes out and people get worked up in such a lather about it. And to which I just kind of go, yeah, but did you, like, in the first minute of the film, it tells you it's not true. So you either accept that and you go along with the ride, or you spend the whole film being like, well, this isn't a Ned Kelly film that I would want. And it's like, well, no, but it's the one that exists. And if there's another Ned Kelly take that you would prefer, go and watch any of the other ones.
Yes.
Because there are so many out there, you know?
Yeah. Still got that one.
Through Last Outlaw, yeah. Even the Mick Jagger film is like is kind of just in some corners being reappraised for its relative accuracy. I mean, it was written by Ian Jones, who had issues with it, but then went on and did The Last Outlaw, which at the time was about as close to reality as people knew how to make it. So, you know, I mean, there are relatively accurate versions of Ned Kelly out there. There are the more romantic versions of Ned Kelly out there. I think there's heaps of room for a revisionist Ned Kelly. I think it's a film that people don't really know what to do with, because it didn't, despite its incredibly starry cast, it didn't make much of a splash when it came out. Like it was provocative and it pissed people off, but I don't think it got a huge amount of play overseas outside of festivals and everything.
It didn't. Because people
Yeah,
didn't, because one thing, overseas people don't necessarily know who Ned Kelly is. I mean, yes.
No, it's a very Australian phenomenon.
It's a very Australian thing. So when you get like the 2003 and you can go, well, this has got every big Australian actor in it. People go, oh, okay, I know Jeffrey Rush. I know Heath Ledger. I know Naomi Watts. Maybe not know Joel at the time, but I think I know this is a version of Australia that I know of when I'm looking at it. This, if you're an overseas going like, I don't know what this is. This is just an art film. And then you're expecting me to know things about this person, but I know nothing. And I don't know which is the better way of watching it, knowing nothing about Ned Kelly or knowing everything about Ned Kelly.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, because of the ways in which it subverts the iconography in the story that we know, it kind of is reliant on you having at least some familiarity with that story in some respects. And I mean, there's a couple of ways you can look at it. You can say, you know, at the end of it, when Ned writes to his daughter, you know, tell your own truth, tell your own story, or, you know, so if it is a thing about myth making, is a thing about controlling your own narrative, then is that narrative that Ned talks about at the end the narrative that grew in you know, in history, while this is sort of his own perception of what he went through, where he was kind of a blank slate, taking all these different influences and everything? Or is it the other way around? Is this supposed to be Ned's version of his own truth? Like, or Ned's version of his story that he's told to his daughter and everything? Like, I think it is a bit confused in that regard. And I think that its relationship with the history that it's riffing on. Yeah, you're right, Lindsay. Like, is it better to watch it without that? But I think for its provocations to land whatsoever, you do need to know what it's riffing on.
Yes.
And I think if you did do a straight adaptation of the Peter Carey novel, and look, one of the things I love about the Peter Carey novel is that it's written in the style of the Jordon letter. Like, it's written in the style of Ned's letter, and it's a kind of eerily authentic feeling rendition of that voice, even though it's full of inaccuracies. But I think if you were to adapt the Peter Carey novel fairly straight, what you would end up with is not a million miles removed from the Gregor Jordon film.
Yeah.
And I also think that, funnily enough, you know, because I've read both the books that both these films are based on, respectively, and like Robert Drew's Our Sunshine, kind of ironically, is a much more like fractured, fragmented, sort of hallucinatory, you know, literary art piece than either Peter Carey's book is, or the film that was ostensibly based on it is. Like, it's told out of order, it jumps around in time, it's really poetic and everything. I'm not saying it's closer to this film, to Justin Kurzel's film. It's not. But, you know, it's sort of like, in some respects, the more, I'm not saying Peter Carey's book is conventional because it isn't. It's not conventional by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a clear narrative and it does sort of adhere mostly to the broad strokes of the story that we know, whereas the Robert Drew book is a lot more experimental. So what you've kind of got is a conventional film based on an experimental book and a deeply unconventional film based on a more conventional novel.
Yes, though I do know when they were trying to sell it overseas because it was getting all the book was very much a awarded book and made maybe that and Bliss made Peter Carey's career in terms of
Well, it won the Booker, didn't it?
Might have done actually, yes. I know one of those two won the Booker, so I couldn't remember which one, but yeah, it won the Booker. It was very, very lauded. But on in America, they called it the Great American Novel, and even though it is an Australian novel,
right.
about an Australian, like you cannot get more Australian than the true story of the Kell Gang. Especially the way he writes it because it's in that kind of voice. I did read some of the letter, and it's amazing that this like mid-20s guy who did not have he felt so literate than what you would think a son of Irish immigrants or convict Irish immigrants living in the middle of nowhere in Victoria would be, but he had such a you can kind of see why people kind of gravitated toward him. Like would have been you can kind of see he had this charisma about him on the page, and I'm just like, oh, okay, I think I get why people were like absolutely Ned Kelly. But yeah, it's a fascinating movie. I love the way it looks. Just the scene in the brothel is kind of incredible. It's kind of got a this very dreamlike, surreal kind of quality, and you don't know what's real and what's not meant to be. And then Thomasin McKenzie comes in as the sweetest person on the planet, and that's kind of your anchor. But yeah, it's good. I mean, those Russell Crowe scenes.
Her scene,
Thomasin
McKenzie's scene with Nicholas Hoult with the baby.
I thought he was going to shoot the baby. I honestly thought that's where it was going.
And you can see the point where the kid starts screaming, and you know that kid was not being directed to do that. So you can sort of see that is a full performance that's actually happening.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely a testament to Nicholas Hoult because he controlled that situation. The kid starts screaming at that particular point at the exact right point for him to just deliver that performance. I'm like, oh shit, that's brilliant. That was absolutely outstanding. That particular shot. There's a couple of good bits in there, but I did find in some parts of it where the dialogue sort of felt almost like they were making it up as they were going along in some scenes. And then you go back to earlier stuff with Russell Crowe, which is fucking brilliant. And that really feels like, they're hitting the storyline, they're hitting the beats, they're hitting the lines. And there's other scenes with Joe Byrne later on. It's like, you are literally just making this up as you're going along. Or at least that's the way it comes across from a performance point of view. But yeah, that baby scene still, I think that's probably one of the better ones in the
I think Essie
film.
Davis was doing her own thing. I think she is married to the director, but I don't think anyone was telling her what to do. She was just she's almost animalistic. It's incredible. What did you think of the pseudo-sexual kind of element with Essie Davis, who's obviously very controlling and knows how to control her children, but in this very weird, almost Oedipal way?
Well, there's kind of a skewed irony there in that if it's a film about a boy looking for a male role model, which it kind of is in a lot of respects, like the thing in the end is that the biggest influence is his mother, like in so many ways, and she controls every aspect of his life. She sells him to Harry Power, like controls various things and like in ways both sexual and maternal and in withholding and giving to him much love and everything. I mean, it's a fantastic performance, and it's very like I found it quite Animal Kingdom coded.
Very Animal Kingdom coded, yes.
Yeah, like sort of reimagining Ellen Kelly as kind of a Kath Pettingall type crime family matriarch pulling the strings or whatever it might be, like Jackie Weaver in Animal Kingdom.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I mean, the sexual stuff in the film, Ned has more sexual chemistry with like Joe Byrne than he does with and Nicholas Holt's with Fitzpatrick as well than he does with Thomasin McKenzie, and then with his own mother. So there's a very sort of strange, skewed thing going on sexually kind of across the board throughout the whole film. But again, I can't quite figure out the exact intention of that. I mean, I think
me neither.
I do feel like some of the homoerotic stuff is kind of there as a provocation for your sort of hardcore Such As Life Tattoo having Kelly fans. But then I don't know, the stuff with his mother I think is a little bit more astute in terms of showing exactly how she wields control over him and showing how in the end, as much as he's tried to strike out and become his own man, when Fitzpatrick says to him, you're looking for a captain, well, that captain's kind of been his mother the whole time. And, at the end, it's like she's the proudest of him at the end of the film when he's done all of this, because he's become this little warrior sort of figure for her that's sort of implied to be what she kind of wanted all along.
Yeah, the way she sort of says, look straight ahead, don't give them a last word, don't say anything, just be silent.
And mind you die like a Kelly son.
Yes, exactly. Like she is so proud of him, and he's so terrified. When the hood goes over his head, like George looks so young, like he looks like he's like 12 years old again.
Yeah,
I think that's intentional.
It's one of the most human moments in the film because Ellen Kelly did say that in real life. She did say, mind you, not like a Kelly son. And Ellen Kelly herself is a really kind of fascinating and controversial figure. In terms of, was she this kind of hard-bitten survivalist who fiercely loved her kids? Was she sort of more of a crime family matriarch? There's all sorts of questions about that. And there's been, full books written about her as well and her life as well. But I think that scene at the end is actually quite powerful between the two of them because of how scared George McKay's version of Ned has become there at the end. But it's like somehow, even though it's the most vulnerable and the most fearful and the most human he's been, particularly for the last kind of 40 minutes of the film when he's sort of going off the rails, the way that he's scared and his mother is kind of showing him this tenderness and love while still sculpting him until the very end. There's something really complex and nice about that, I think.
Yeah, the true kind of role model was her all along, even though he keeps coming back, like, he keeps coming back to her. Like, no, even when he comes back and said, you sold me to Harry Power, and she's like, yeah, well, what else was I gonna do? Like, but he keeps coming back to her, and the fact that they have that kind of thing at the end, I think is really, really great. Though my favorite scene, I think it's the time when Kurzel's actually coming in to talk to Ned Kelly, and he's writing. And they have this amazing conversation about literature and how you tell a story. And it doesn't fit with anything in the movie, or it doesn't feel like it does, but it's just, I don't know if he's telling him to find his own voice and let him tell your own story instead of letting everyone else tell your own story, which I think Ellen kind of negates by the end. But I think it's such a cool scene. That whole room bunker with the Ned Kelly slit windows and the graffiti, I think is very cool.
Yeah, I read
theme across the board, isn't it?
It's constant people looking in holes and these slits and light everywhere, and
Well, I read a couple of interviews with Justin Kurzel after I finished watching it last night, just because I was kind of curious to sort of get a bit more insight into the intention of the film, because the intention's there, I just haven't quite figured it out just yet. But yeah, which it's fine anyway, because I think obviously film should be open to interpretation. But he talks a lot about like the slits in the various constructions and buildings and everything, and talking about this idea of like that destiny always being around him. I think the relative passivity of Ned in the first 2/3 of the film is quite deliberate, because it's these forces around him are sort of pushing him to become to become the monitor, I guess, in the parlance of the film. And the moment where it's implied that he kills Fitzpatrick, even though that again didn't happen in real life, from then on it's like, well, this is what he is now, and that's what everything sort of led up to him being. But it also is kind of a conscious choice for him to basically go crazy the way he does, and the questions about do we make our own destiny, or is it are we led to it, free will or not, so the big questions are all sort of there.
It's just with how the intention is and how it kind of flows, because it does feel like such a jar. Oh wait, he's in charge of an army now, or an actual gang, when before he was just led to one place to another. And the whole idea of like selling bodies is very much within the thing. Like he gives Fitzgerald his sister so he can get his brother off, but of course then it doesn't work. And so there's a lot of interesting themes in there that I don't necessarily know how they relate to one another, but it's a fascinating movie.
See, and I think where it leaves it, because look, if this is the kind of punk rock revisionist Ned Kelly, then I still think we don't have a definitive Ned Kelly yet. Given that it's been done so many times, and yet there isn't one Ned Kelly film that would be regarded kind of as a stone cold classic. The Last Outlaw in the 80s is probably the most well liked among Kelly enthusiasts, but it's dated. It's dated and it's too long, and it's hard to imagine it sort of, even if you get on DVD, like it's still got like the the sort of Channel 10 ad break things in it and everything. Like it's a very sort of, and it's not well known enough to get like a really serious remaster or anything. Even if it did, you know, that would probably predominantly be interesting to people who already have a real affinity for the mythology and for the story and for the history and everything. So I think there is still room for something else there. I know that a few years ago, the guys who made The Legend of Ben Hall did try to do a crowdfunding campaign for a Legend of Ned Kelly film that would have been the biggest crowdfunding campaign in Australian history, but it didn't hit its target. So maybe that sort of indicates that that there's maybe we're sick of it. Maybe people don't really want to see another version of the story. Maybe people feel like they've seen enough of it. I personally still think there is room for a version that balances the complexities a bit better. And I think my instinct is that version would be the one that would have the best chance of actually breaking through, because it wouldn't be so heavily skewed into one agenda or another, you know. But maybe I'm even wrong on that. You know, maybe it's just a story that's too much of a tough nut to crack. But I think I just go, it's got such a clear Hollywood 5-act structure to it.
It's very cinematic.
Very cinematic right from the start. You know, you've got the inciting incident, you've got the setup of him being in jail in the rough childhood, you've got the inciting incident of Fitzpatrick, you've got the String of Art Creek kind of point of no return thing, you've got the time on the run, the banks, all the public fighting over whether he's a hero or a villain and everything. You've got the sort of all is lost Nadine moment of killing Aaron Sherritt, and then of course you've got the big shootout at Glenrowan, and you can go further into the trial and everything that surrounded that as well if you want to. I mean, it's all there. I just don't know why it's been quite so hard to do a version that really resonates with people, because it doesn't seem to have happened yet.
Yeah, actually, a trial version of Ned Kelly would be amazing. Just actually going through the trial, like you could do a whole bit of is he a villain? Is he?
That's a huge part of the film.
Yeah. Just to have a film of the trial, like just to have like a courtroom drama. I mean, yes, you know he's going to be found guilty and he will be executed, but I think that would be really fascinating because you could really just dig into who this man was, and you can just lay out all the point of view.
If I'm going to put my my writer hat on for a second, like, I mean, if I was going to have a crack at it, like, and I've been thinking about this for a few years because I've sort of tried a couple of times to write a Ned Kelly thing, but what I reckon would be the best or most interesting or fresh way to do it would be to do a film that's set entirely in the inn around the siege, and you tell it from the perspective of Kurzel, the school teacher who, because if you look at the history, like Kurzel was this skinny school teacher who was, you know, recovering from polio. And then, you know, next thing in comes the Kelly gang, and they're all big and boisterous and dangerous. And, you know, we don't know what they're going to do. We don't know if they're going to hurt us or not, or what's going on. And then you've got Kurzel spending the whole night getting close to Ned Kelly, basically flattering his ego, schmoozing him, spending time with him. You know, they were doing, you know, spend a lot of that night together and everything. And then getting to the point where he wins over Ned's trust. And then Ned lets him go to attend to his sick wife. And instead he goes and he flags down the train. I mean, that's an act of extreme courage, no matter what way you cut it. I mean, Kurzel gets damned by Kelly supporters everywhere, but the bravery of that man, and the idea that it was the skinny polio suffering school teacher who would have been no one's idea of the, you know, the nemesis who might bring Ned Kelly down, having done it. And so if you did a story that focused on that and was kind of almost like a psychological thriller, like a tense thing of him sort of trying to win over the trust, even though gang members didn't trust him and kind of had his number and everything, he's trying to kind of convince them all and get close, because if he doesn't, like, a train full of all these people is going to die. I mean, that to me would also be a way to really explore the mythology, because imagine the conversations him and Ned had. You know, you could totally explore the mythology and everything from an outside perspective, and even, you know, imagining like Ned kind of coming in thinking, Kurzel coming in thinking that Ned's just this raging monster. Then the more he talks to him, the more he hears his side of the story, the more he's sympathetic, the more conflicted he gets. And what do I do? Do I go out and stop this train, or do I let this kind of play out? I mean, there's to me, there's a really different angle in that you could do. It wouldn't be the big sweeping definitive Ned Kelly version that I think we do still probably need, but I mean, that's, if I had a crack at it, that's what I would do.
Do you think that Ned Kelly's too big? Like, I know when you do something like Justin mentioned Young Guns, which is a really fun 2 movies, but Billy the Kid Story, even though he again died very young and you forget that he was like in his early 20s as well, but it seems too big just for one. The whole story just seems maybe too big, and so kind of bringing it down to a moment where you get to see how eloquent and charismatic obviously Ned probably was, versus, and actually, but that first bluster of these guys, very scary guys coming into this inn, with guns and everything like that, and then getting slowly to know, I think would be actually really that's very cool. Someone should give money to Gabe to make that movie, please.
Yes, please. Let me have a crack. I mean, like, just I do think
I have read Gabe's script of Joe Byrne at Glen Rowan, which is very
oh yeah,
good.
that's one I wrote a few years ago. That's still rattling around somewhere.
Yeah.
But no, I just think like I think you're probably right, Lindsay, in that it is too big, and that I mean, not to bring up the Springsteen film again, but I mean, what that film chose to do was to focus on a moment in time, you know, to hone in and really zoom in just on that period leading up to the recording of Nebraska, and I think that honing the focus does kind of, in some ways, the more you hone the focus, the bigger you can get with your ideas, because you're not put under pressure to race through so much history and leave so much out.
It's like Lincoln.
Alternatively, yeah. Whereas alternatively, you know, doing a version that doing like a TV version or something would be probably optimal. But I mean, how do you
six-part series or something like that would be quite good.
Yeah, could you raise the money to do it? I mean, it's a huge, expansive story, and I mean, look, as long as people are fascinated by it, and they will be fascinated by it forever, because it, you know, it whether you like it or not, it kind of is our, you know, our cultural myth. So I think people are going to keep coming back to it again and again and again. I think there is going to be a bit of a sense, though, and I think this is possibly a big part of why I think Kurzel was allowed to go so wildly, you know, off base with it, is because, you know, we've seen the beat so many times. You know, we know about Fitzpatrick, we know about Stringy Bark Creek, we know about the two banks. So is there a way to tell that story again that feels fresh? Is it going to mean waiting for a couple of generations until the Ledger film and the Jagger film have kind of faded away a little bit more before you have another crack at telling those beats again? I mean, how do you do it in a way that doesn't feel like you're treading the same ground? Even if you have a more sort of even-handed, morally ambiguous take on the material, you still do need to tell those same beats of the story again and again and again. And I mean, you know, Stringy Bark Creek was pretty well realized in the Gregor Jordon film, I think.
It really was. That was a very well done scene.
Very well done scene.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, I think thinking of fresh, different ways to tell the story will be important. But as true history of the Kell Gang proves, the more fresh and different and counterintuitive you go with it, the further you move away from giving us what I do think culturally we need, which is a really, really good Ned Kelly film that, you know, does the story proper justice.
Yes, because it is a big story. It is a fascinating story. And I think I mean, yeah, you can go see documentaries. You can go see nearly every decade. Can't believe the Australians, for the first cinema thing was on Ned Kelly. That is insane.
Yeah.
Not long after he died, by the way, not even 30 years. Yeah.
26 years after he died.
Yeah, 6 years after he died. Like it's insane, but it's, yeah, the story is absolutely huge. And watching these movies was fascinating because it is both a digging into this ideal of what it is meant to be Australian, and it is done through this guy who had no intention of ever doing that. I mean, did he consider himself Australian? Did he consider himself Irish, or a child of immigrant parents? I mean, Victoria wasn't fully formed yet.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's kind of partly why the theory of the Republic that he was, you know, in some corners allegedly trying to form has taken hold, because Victoria wasn't fully formed, Australia wasn't fully formed yet. You know, like it was all fairly recent history, and you know, I do think that is a bit of a cultural void that we grapple with, because we don't have the big, deep, rich histories of, you know, older countries, at least in terms of, you know, colonial Australia and, you know, what the country that we've been since colonization. So with that in mind, it's kind of no wonder that we sort of really glom onto these certain stories that can kind of become legend in terms of giving us any sort of national identity whatsoever.
No, and both of these stories are about national identity.
Well, it does.
Yeah. Sorry,
absolutely.
Justin?
And if you think about someone like Ned Kelly as well, like he was an Australian-born person in 1854, and there were not as many people who were living in the country who were Australian-born. So he's the very first Australian-born legend, effectively. If you look at bushrangers before that, most of them are ex-convicts or ex-people, or they'd come from overseas. He's the first one to come from Australia. So he's the first Australian character, I think. Not necessarily has to be an outlaw or criminal or anything like that. He's a character, someone that would gravitate, who is an Australian-born person, and he's part of our story. And I think that that's probably why he's so important to that and important to people back in, late 19th century, early 20th century, because he's a Australian character. He's not someone from the old world. He's someone from the new world. He's from our world, effectively. And so that was, at the time, forging our own identity. It was like, here's one of ours. And I think that that's probably why he's endured so much, because of that.
No, well, absolutely well said. No, this watching these movies have been fascinating just because I only knew the broad strokes of Ned Kelly. So even though I'm watching two very fictionalized versions of it, it's been sort of fascinating sort of to go, oh, okay, so these two very, very different versions on telling the story, where there's one is very interested in Ned Kelly, the other one is not so much, but interested in everything around him. But they are still playing with these elements of colonialism with this kid who was born in Australia and now who is trying to kind of grow up in the middle of this. I think is both very fascinating, and both these movies do touch on it in very, very different ways. But no, I love when you're watching two movies on the same subject and they could not be more. They could not. No, they're completely different. Like they could not be more different than they are.
Yeah, it's again, just watching them both back to back. I mean, if you're at all interested, I recommend it because it gives you a lot to think about in terms of how very, very different creative sensibilities can be applied to the same material and come up with just completely. I mean, if you change the names, I don't think you would. If you change names between the two films, I don't think you could watch them back to back and figure out it's supposed to be the same story.
True.
Yeah, there just happened to be there's a cup called Fitzgerald in both of them. How interesting. No, thank you so much for coming on for this. This has been absolutely fascinating. And as soon as Gabe said, oh yeah, me and Justin love Ned Kelly and we should do a Ned Kelly double, I'm like, absolutely. Like, let's do it. But no, this has been absolutely great.
No, thanks so much, Lindsay. Thanks for letting us come on and nerd out for a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I love it. It's my
an
favorite
absolute
thing.
pleasure to do this. We've had discussions on this that go for hours and hours and hours, and Gabe and I usually end up standing out the front of the old Melbourne jail after a couple of drinks, going, we're here at the place it happened.
Actually, yes, if you're ever in Melbourne, you can go to the old Melbourne jail. It's right it's in the middle of the city. You can go there. I think that's where they keep the helmet.
No, that's in the State Library. You can see
that's in the State Library. Yes, hence yes.
Yeah.
I always forget where it is because I have seen the helmet, and it's in the State Library, which is actually kind of close to the Melbourne jail. Two very kind of big landmarks in the city, so you can actually just go in, and they're both fascinating places.
Also, you can go up in Benalla near where I grew up. This is the thing I think is maybe the coolest. You can go to it used to be the police museum. I think it's now called something else, but it's still there. And anyway, you go to the Benalla Museum and they have the sash that Ned wore, the green and gold sash that he was awarded for, which features in both of these films.
Yes, it looks like an AFL in the Kurzel. It looks like an AFL uniform. Like
I think quite deliberately. Yeah,
yeah, very deliberately.
He was given a green and gold sash for saving the life of a drowning boy when he was a child, and he wore that sash at Glenrowan when he was taken down. And they've got the sash in the Benalla Museum, and it's still stained with his blood.
Oh my god!
Like you can still see his blood stained there. It's quite incredible.
Okay, I need to go there and see that. That is actually
and right
very
next
cool.
to it. They've also got the old door from the old jail, which is where they strung Joe Byrne's body up after and there's a lot of photos of that. The original photos of that door is actually in that museum as well, right next to where the sash is.
Oh my god!
It's another fascinating thing.
No, there's so much to dig into just because there's so many facets, which is like this is such a huge story that it's kind of like can even miniseries.
For anyone listening who wants to go, and really see the real history of the Kelly Gang, go to Glenrowan and go to the Sound and Light Show, which is it's something else. There is animatronic, and it is absolutely amazing. Again, it's so weird. It is just incredible. But if you're ever over there, that is definitely worth seeing.
Absolutely. Before we go, Justin, please tell people where they can find your good work.
They can find me probably hanging out talking to Gabe a lot of the time. But otherwise, you can find me, it's stupidly enough, at Aussie_Indiana in my weird Instagram page. That's probably the best way to find me.
It's really cool, actually. You've been acting in it a bit, I've noticed, and I've been loving it. Gabe, please tell people they can find your good work and your books, because you have released 2. Was it last year or this year? It's I don't know time.
I've got best place to find me would be on Instagram at Geo Bergmoser, phonetically Go Bergmoser, and my books. So I've just had my new book High Rise out, which is like Die Hard and a commission flat, but I've just had one out on Audible, an Audible original called Backstory, which is like, imagine a murder mystery by way of Rashomon, kind of told in the style of a true crime podcast. And it's been doing really, really well in the States recently, so that's been quite exciting to see. But that's something really, really different for me, and I'm really proud of it. It's got some really well-known Aussie actors in it, like Michael Caine and Brooke Satchwell and Emma Harvey from Colin from Accounts and everything. So check that out, because I think it's pretty cool.
It is actually very, very cool. I haven't finished it yet, but I have been listening to it. It has been
thanks, Liz.
Yeah, it's been very, very cool. Of course, Schlock Awe, you can find the podcast and all the pods. Please rate and review. Schlock Awe 1, either say on Instagram, Blue Sky. Yeah, we will be back with another double feature. All right, thanks, guys. Bye.